Since the end of the Cold War, the notion that capitalism is a socioeconomic system that is most compatible with democracy has become dominant. Many economists, academics, and writers have diffused and sold the idea that free markets and free people are a single package. Consequently, communism is perceived as inherently undemocratic and has been conflated with the authoritarian governments of North Korea, Mao's China, and Stalin's USSR. First, it's necessary to point out that most of the dictatorships that are associated with communism were never genuinely communist systems. Just because the state owns the means of production does not mean communism is in effect. The USSR under Stalin was not democratic, but Stalinism was the degeneration of the communist aims of the Russian Revolution, not their realization. In any case, a tendency to correlate communism to autocracy and capitalism to democracy reveals a massive misunderstanding on the relationship between capitalism and democracy. While liberal democracies are presented as an ideal of progress, in class society, democracy has always functioned as a veil for the dictatorship of capital. Therefore, democracy under capitalism exists in theory, but not in practice. In democracies, the will of the masses can be expressed through parties, unions, or organizations. Rule is thus exercised through social power. Capitalism, however, produces a society in which profit-driven motives and economic power transcend all social and political power. If the economy is not subordinate to social power, so that not only the state, but also the economy is democratized, then democracy cannot exist. This is because capital is not concerned with freedom, equality, employment, debt levels, or even productivity, as long as chains, inequality, unemployment, high debt, and low productivity are supplemented by growing profits. Ultimately, the market is profoundly undemocratic. There is no rule of the masses in terms of what is produced, how it's produced, the values of commodities, the prices at which they are sold, or the wages paid to produce them. This is why what we see in most democracies today is rising profits through declining wages. What is more, ordinary citizens have no say in the development of economic policies, which lacks any mechanisms of genuine accountability. The working class can't hold financial institutions accountable for misconduct. So while capitalism restricts all decisions to a limited number of actors that control financial governance, the masses suffer the consequences of an economic system that impedes democratic participation. When the economy neglects wider societal interests and power is concentrated in the hands of the few, the people struggle to participate in governance. This manifests as a restricted or pseudo-democracy, that is, a society that maintains democracy as a mass display. The vast majority of people have no democratic control over issues like ecosystem protection, public education, rent and housing laws, natural resource extraction, and employer relations, all because capitalism prioritizes profits over civic needs and democratic quality. But economic authoritarianism under the banner of democracy is reaching a breaking point due to the tendency of capitalism to undermine democracy. As capitalism exhausts the social basis necessary for democracy, the relationship between capital and democracy is starting to collapse under the weight of its own contradiction. And this process is illustrated by the widespread privation and narrowing of democratic conditions throughout the world, by the rejection of establishment politics, by the use of technocratic governments, and by the rise of right-wing populists. Contrary to popular belief, communism is a far more democratic system, driven by the people for the people from below. Whereas capitalism is the rule of a minority over the majority, communism is the rule of the vast majority over a tiny minority. It operates off the idea that what affects all should be decided by all. And for this very reason, communism is the democratization of the state and the economy. Communists call for public ownership of property and industry, which means that 1, production is governed through democratic mechanisms, and 2, basic societal needs, goods and services like healthcare, employment, childcare, education, food, and clean water are public amenities for everyone to enjoy instead of being privatized and designated for the select few. Communism thus provides the masses with democratic control over the most fundamental requirements. At the same time, it provides the true capacity for collective action, meaning social forces are the dominant form of power. The Communist Manifesto itself essentially ends with a call for workers to win the battle for real democracy against the dictatorship of capital. In fact, communists and members of the labor movement all over the world have long fought for a genuinely democratic society, one that is free from all forms of exploitation and oppression. The communist tradition has played a huge role in promoting and reviving democracy under the leadership of the working class. This is where the true communist struggle lies, not in solidarity with despotic governance. In spite of all the misconceptions that exist around it, communism would serve as a genuinely democratic alternative to the capitalist oligarchies that we call democracies today.